In the early morning hours of June 4, 2016, a solo kayaker set off from the rocky cliffs near Depot Bay, Oregon. Her name was Hannah Carlisle, a 29-year-old adventurer with a passion for solo expeditions and exploring the rugged coastline of the Pacific Northwest. Equipped with her kayak, a small supply bag, and a GPS tracker, she intended to make a solo journey along the coast, navigating the harsh waters of the Pacific Ocean and taking in the scenic beauty of the Oregon coastline. Hannah had done it before, and she was well prepared. By late afternoon, a few hundred yards off the shore, Hannah's kayak had vanished. Her GPS signal, which had been transmitting every few minutes, went silent. Her family, knowing her route, waited for hours, but there was no sign of Hannah. A call to the local authorities triggered a massive search operation involving the Coast Guard, local law enforcement, and volunteer search teams. The waters were rough, with an unusual mix of strong currents and swirling eddies that made search efforts difficult. Helicopters scoured the skies, while boats cruised the coastline, hoping to catch sight of a bright-colored kayak or a sign of Hannah in the water. But nothing. The search lasted for days, and yet no trace of Hannah was ever found. No overturned kayak, no paddle, no evidence that she had even been out there. It was as if she had disappeared into thin air. By the time the official search was called off, there was no sign of foul play, no wreckage, and no plausible explanation for her disappearance. The case was classified as an unsolved missing person case. The mystery of the solo kayaker, presumed drowned, was filed away in the archives, the waters of the Pacific swallowing yet another person without a trace. But 5 years later, in the summer of 2021, a team of divers was sent to explore the underwater caves off the coast of Depot Bay. The area had always been a hotspot for exploration, but what they found that day would shake the small coastal town to its core. While investigating a submerged rock formation, one of the divers spotted something out of place: a small weathered GPS device wedged between two large rocks on the seafloor. As the diver carefully approached the device, they realized something that made their heart race. The GPS had been duct-taped to the rock, its screen cracked but still visible. It was the same GPS model that Hannah had been using. A closer inspection confirmed that the device had been activated within hours of her disappearance. The divers brought the GPS back to the surface, and forensic experts quickly confirmed that the device belonged to Hannah Carlisle. But what they found next was even more puzzling. The GPS hadn't been placed there by accident. It had been deliberately secured to the rock with duct tape, strategically, carefully taped in a way that indicated someone had gone to great lengths to attach it. This was no accident. Someone had been involved. But who and why? The GPS revealed some alarming information when analyzed. The last recorded position showed that the device had been stationary for several hours, far out in the open ocean, just before the signal stopped. Had Hannah been trapped out there? Was she still alive when someone decided to secure the GPS to the rock? Or had it been left there intentionally to confuse the investigation? As word of the discovery spread, the case was reopened. Investigators, now 5 years removed from the original disappearance, began to piece together the events leading up to that fateful day. The more they looked into Hannah's life, the more unusual details surfaced. Hannah had been a private person, a free spirit who kept her personal life under tight wraps. She had few close friends, and while she had an active presence on social media, her posts were always carefully curated. Those who knew her well described her as an intensely independent person, someone who preferred solitude, but no one could explain why she would have gone out on the water alone that day, with the weather conditions deteriorating rapidly and the tides more dangerous than usual. Her family, while devastated by her disappearance, didn't have many answers either. They told investigators that Hannah had become more withdrawn in the weeks leading up to her kayaking trip. She had confided in a close friend about a sense of unease, a feeling that something was closing in on her, though she never elaborated on what she meant. Her last conversation with her father had been short but odd. She had expressed a deep desire to escape, to disconnect from everything. But was this a mere expression of her independent spirit, or had something more sinister been behind her words? The police were able to trace her movements leading up to the day of her disappearance. According to her last communication with a close friend, Hannah had mentioned a mysterious encounter with someone while she was on the road, not far from Depot Bay. The encounter, according to her friend, had made her uneasy, but she hadn't gone into detail. Was this person connected to her disappearance? Had they played a role in her death, or was Hannah's disappearance simply a tragic accident? The investigation turned to the waters themselves, more specifically, the currents. Oceanographers who studied the region pointed out that the area where Hannah disappeared was notorious for its unpredictable swells, powerful tides, and shifting currents. It was possible that she had capsized, and her kayak could have been swept away before anyone could get to her. But what about the GPS? What about the careful duct taping of it to the rock? That didn't fit the narrative of an accidental drowning. With these new questions in mind, investigators began to reach out to the Coast Guard for information about any unusual occurrences during the time of Hannah's disappearance. They uncovered something strange, a report filed by a nearby fisherman. On the day of Hannah's disappearance, the fisherman had seen something unusual in the water. A small object, a kayak perhaps, drifting aimlessly in the turbulent water. He hadn't thought much of it at the time, but upon reflection, the incident seemed strangely timed, right around the period when Hannah was presumed lost. The fisherman had been vague in his report, and he had never been interviewed by the original investigators. Was this his guilt speaking after the discovery of the GPS, or did he know something more? Was he the one who had placed the GPS on the rock? The diver who had discovered the device recalled that the rock it had been attached to was located close to a known fishing route. The more they uncovered, the more it became clear that this was not just a case of a solo kayaker tragically disappearing into the ocean. There were too many oddities, too many unanswered questions. Who had placed the GPS in the water, and why? Why had the signal been left running for so long, only to suddenly cut off? Was it a deliberate attempt to mislead, or was it something else? And most disturbingly, if Hannah was still alive when the GPS was attached to the rock, where had she gone? What had happened to her after the device went silent? Had someone been trying to send a message, to leave behind a clue? Or was the entire thing part of something more sinister? A cover-up that went far deeper than anyone could have imagined. As the investigation continues, the questions only grow. Who was involved? What had happened to Hannah Carlisle? And why had the GPS been duct-taped to a rock in the first place? There is still no clear answer, only more mysteries and whispers. What really happened out there on the coast of Oregon? The truth may never be known, but one thing is certain. The ocean is vast, and it keeps its secrets. And sometimes those secrets have a way of being found, no matter how many years pass. The discovery of the GPS device was just the beginning. As divers continued to explore the area, they uncovered another unsettling detail. Something that wasn't visible at first, hidden beneath layers of sand and debris. At the base of the submerged rock, close to where the GPS had been found, they discovered a small rusted hook tangled in seaweed. It wasn't an ordinary piece of marine debris. It was a piece of gear that could have come from a fishing boat or a piece of specialized equipment. The hook wasn't just discarded, it was deliberately placed, wedged into the rock like a trap. As forensic teams analyzed the hook, they found that it was older than the GPS device, corroded and worn by the ocean. Its markings indicated it had been used for years, perhaps decades, and yet its presence so close to where the GPS had been duct-taped to the rock seemed far from coincidental. Could this be yet another clue, an item placed by someone who knew exactly what they were doing? Someone who understood the ocean's unpredictable nature, who could predict the movements of the tides? Back in town, Claire Donovan, an investigative journalist who had been following the case since the moment the GPS was discovered, reached out to those who knew Hannah best. Hannah's family had not given up hope, but they too were at a loss. Their last conversation with her had been vague. She had seemed restless, eager to escape, but they didn't know why. Her mother in particular had mentioned that Hannah had begun acting differently in the months leading up to her trip, more reserved, more guarded. There had been an unsettling shift in her demeanor, though no one could pinpoint exactly what had triggered it. But it wasn't until Claire spoke with Hannah's closest friend Rebecca that new details began to emerge. Rebecca described an encounter that had occurred shortly before Hannah left for the kayaking trip. She'd received a strange call from Hannah late one evening, during which she sounded frantic, almost as if she had been trying to outrun something. Rebecca said that the conversation was filled with cryptic remarks, most notably Hannah saying, "I don't know how much longer I can stay ahead of it." When Rebecca pressed her for more details, Hannah abruptly ended the call, and that was the last time they spoke. Claire pored over the details of this conversation. Something about it didn't sit right. Was Hannah referring to someone or something pursuing her? Was it a person, a threat, or had she been referring to something more abstract, more intangible, something she could not fully articulate even to her closest friend? Claire's investigation led her to one disturbing theory after another. Some suggested that Hannah had simply misjudged the waters, that the ocean had claimed her in an accident. Others speculated that her disappearance had been orchestrated by someone she had encountered along her travels. Yet, as Claire delved deeper into the case, she came across something more disturbing, an eerie pattern of disappearances all along the Oregon coastline, dating back decades. In 2001, a fisherman had gone missing near the same part of the coast. His boat had been found adrift, his gear untouched, his disappearance chalked up to an unfortunate accident, like so many others. In 1994, another adventurer had disappeared from the same stretch of coastline while on a solo kayaking trip. Theories abounded for both cases. Some believed the disappearances were connected to shifting tides and unpredictable currents. Others believed they were linked to mysterious, unspoken dangers of the deep ocean. But one detail remained constant throughout each of these cases: the lack of evidence. No bodies, no trace of the individuals, just the sudden disappearance and the lingering mystery. Claire's investigation took her to the Coast Guard office, where she met with Chief Petty Officer Linda Carter. Linda had been stationed in the area for over 2 decades and had overseen numerous search and rescue missions. She was no stranger to the difficult, often fruitless task of scouring the rugged coastline for missing persons. When Claire mentioned the eerie pattern of disappearances, Linda's face grew solemn. "It's been whispered about for years," she said quietly. "We've had reports of strange currents, odd sea conditions, and unexplained phenomena in these waters. It's not something we talk about publicly, but there are places along this coast where things happen, things that don't make sense." Linda went on to describe how some of the missing persons cases were never fully investigated, either dismissed as accidents or left unsolved. But she hinted at something more, something that went beyond the usual causes of disappearances. "There's a stretch of water north of here, right near the cliffs," she said. "People who go there, they don't come back the same, or they don't come back at all." Claire pressed her for more details, but Linda grew evasive, her tone shifting with discomfort. "Some things are better left alone," she murmured. "There are some questions you don't want answers to." Claire couldn't help but feel the weight of Linda's words. Whatever it was, whatever force had claimed the people who had vanished off this coastline, it was something the authorities didn't want to confront, something they had been trying to ignore for years. In the weeks that followed, Claire's investigation took on a new urgency. The discovery of the GPS duct tape to the rock, the cryptic messages from Hannah, and the strange warning from Linda were all pointing to something much larger, something beyond a simple kayak accident. There was a force in these waters, something ancient, something that had taken people before and would take others again. Claire reached out to oceanographers who had studied the region's currents, but their findings only deepened the mystery. According to their data, there were unpredictable eddies and shifts in the currents near the area where Hannah had disappeared. However, the physical anomalies they observed couldn't account for what the divers had discovered. The GPS wasn't just a random piece of debris, it had been placed there with deliberate care, and the hook, why had it been hidden so carefully beneath the rock? It wasn't just the ocean that was claiming these people. There was something more, something hidden beneath the surface of the ocean. Claire returned to the coastline, standing at the edge of the cliffs where the waves crashed against the rocks below. As the wind whipped through her hair, she could almost hear the whispers of those who had come before her, whispers carried on the breeze, warnings lost to time. She had uncovered so much, but the truth was still just out of reach. She glanced down at the GPS in her hand, now cracked and weathered by the sea. It was the key to understanding what had happened to Hannah Carlisle. But it wasn't just about her. This was about every disappearance that had come before, every unanswered question, every eerie coincidence that had never been explained. What had started as a simple search for a missing kayaker had turned into something much darker, something that stretched back generations. As Claire stood there, the cold wind biting into her skin, she realized one undeniable truth. There was more to this than just a lone kayaker's disappearance. Whatever lay beneath the surface of these waters, it was waiting, and it had claimed more than just one victim. What had happened to Hannah? What had happened to all the others? Was the ocean simply an unforgiving force of nature, or was there something more at play, something that didn't want to be found? The answers, it seemed, were buried deep in the cold depths of the ocean. And as Claire watched the waves crash against the rocks below, she couldn't shake the feeling that the truth was still out there, hidden beneath the surface, waiting for the next person to come too close. The discovery of the GPS device had shaken the investigation to its core, but it wasn't the only unsettling clue. As the forensic team continued to analyze the device, they uncovered something that only deepened the mystery. The data history of the GPS revealed a series of strange patterns leading up to the last signal before it went dark. Forensics had identified subtle discrepancies in the GPS's movement, small, seemingly inconsequential shifts in its location, not consistent with a kayak drifting aimlessly in the water. The patterns suggested a deliberate course, as though the kayaker had been maneuvering the device intentionally, attempting to communicate something, or perhaps to leave a clue. But what did that mean? Why had the GPS been duct taped to a rock? And more importantly, why had it been left there at all? As Claire dove deeper into the mystery, she came across a haunting new piece of information. Hannah's last communication with her family had been less than an hour before the GPS signal went silent. A simple message, sent via text. "I think I'm close to something. I'll be off the water soon." Those words, innocent and brief, seemed harmless at first glance, but to Claire, they felt like a warning. Something had been out there with Hannah. Something that had influenced her, pulled her deeper into the ocean, into the unknown. The more Claire thought about it, the more the pieces of the puzzle began to fit together. The coastline near Depot Bay had always been known for its treacherous waters, but it wasn't just the dangerous currents that made this area so deadly. There were whispers, unexplained phenomena that had been reported by locals for decades, unsettling stories passed down through generations, all pointing to an unspoken truth. Something in the waters was drawing people in, luring them toward the cliffs and the churning sea. Claire reached out to local fishermen whose families had lived in the area for generations, hoping to learn more about these whispered legends. Most were reluctant to speak, wary of drawing attention to what they considered old superstitions. But there was one man, an elderly fisherman named Sam, who seemed willing to share his story. Sam had lived on the coast for over 60 years, and had seen things that the outside world couldn't explain. "There's a part of the coast," Sam said, his voice low and gravelly, "where the water's different. It's not just the currents. It's something else, something that pulls you in, makes you want to go further, deeper. It's like a calling. People who've been out on the water long enough, they start to feel it. But the thing is, you can't fight it. It just gets stronger the closer you get to the cliffs. And once you're close enough, it's too late." Sam paused, glancing around as if ensuring no one else was listening before continuing. "I don't know what it is. No one really does. But I know it's real. I've seen it take people. Good people. Strong people. Just gone. Disappeared. They were drawn to the water and the ocean. It keeps them. It doesn't let them go." The hair on Claire's neck stood on end as she listened to Sam's words. She had heard rumors like this before, whispers about strange disappearances, about the ocean's pull. But hearing it from someone who had lived through it, someone who had experienced it firsthand, gave the stories an unsettling weight. Sam's words weren't just old tales passed around a campfire. They felt like a warning. The ocean had taken Hannah, just as it had taken others before her. But why? And what had drawn her into the waters that day? Claire's next step was to examine the environment itself. The coastline near Depot Bay was known for its jagged cliffs and deep ocean currents, making it a popular spot for divers and kayakers, but also an incredibly dangerous one. Claire spoke to oceanographers who had studied the region's currents, trying to understand if there was any natural explanation for Hannah's disappearance. According to their research, the tides and currents in that area were particularly treacherous, shifting unpredictably and creating dangerous eddies and whirlpools that could easily capsize even the most experienced kayaker. However, none of the experts could explain the presence of the GPS device on the rock. None of them could explain why it had been carefully placed there, secured with duct tape as if it were meant to be found. Was it a mistake? An accident? Or was there something more intentional about its placement? Claire's gut told her it was the latter. There were no signs of struggle, no indication that Hannah had been attacked or threatened. The waters had taken her, but what had caused her to venture so far from shore? What had led her to the precise spot where the GPS had been placed? Was it a natural accident, or had she been guided, almost pushed, into this fate? As the investigation progressed, Claire learned more about Hannah's life in the months leading up to her disappearance. It was during this time that Claire uncovered another strange detail. Hannah had been receiving cryptic messages from someone she had met while traveling. These messages had started shortly after her departure, becoming more frequent as her trip went on. The person behind the messages was anonymous, but the content suggested an eerie familiarity. Someone who seemed to know things about Hannah's past, about her desires, her fears. Someone who knew where she was, what she was doing, and perhaps even what she would do next. Could this person have had something to do with her disappearance? Was Hannah's journey more than just a solo kayaking trip? Was she being watched, guided perhaps, by someone with darker intentions? It was around this time that Claire started to connect the dots to the past. She found records of similar disappearances along the Oregon coast, people who had disappeared without a trace, their bodies never recovered. Some of the cases were written off as accidents, others as simply unsolved mysteries. But as Claire delved deeper into the reports, she began to notice the same strange patterns. The disappearances all occurred near the same section of coastline, near Depot Bay, and many of them involved individuals who were alone, adventurers, travelers, explorers, all drawn to the water. Claire couldn't ignore the mounting evidence. There was something in the water, something pulling people in, luring them to the edge. And it wasn't just the ocean. It was the land, the energy of the place itself. The coast of Oregon wasn't just a beautiful, rugged wilderness. It was a place where something darker lingered just beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to claim those who ventured too close. As she prepared to return to the coast for another round of interviews, Claire felt a strange sense of unease settle over her. There was so much she had uncovered, so many unsettling theories, so many questions that refused to be answered. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched, that the forest, the water, the land itself was aware of her investigation, aware of the truth she was getting closer to. And yet, she couldn't stop. She couldn't walk away from the mystery of Hannah Carlyle. Something told her that the ocean had only just begun to reveal its secrets, and that the final answer was still out there, waiting to be found. As Claire packed her bags and headed back toward Depot Bay, she knew this was far from over. The ocean, the land, the forest, they were all part of something much bigger than she could understand, but she was determined to uncover the truth, no matter what it cost. The question still remained: what really happened out there on the waters of Oregon's coast? And Claire was getting closer to finding out. But in a place like this, where nature itself seemed to play by its own rules, she couldn't help but wonder if she would survive long enough to learn the truth. The investigation had become a labyrinth of clues and questions, each discovery leading Claire deeper into a tangled web of eerie coincidences and chilling revelations. As Claire returned to the coast, determined to uncover more about the mysterious disappearance of Hannah Carlyle, the sense of urgency that had driven her for weeks intensified. But as she drove along the rugged shoreline of Depot Bay, she couldn't shake the overwhelming feeling that the coast, the water, the very land itself was watching her. Waiting. This time, Claire had a new lead. A local man who had been one of the first to report the sighting of a small kayak drifting aimlessly in the waters near the cliffs on the day of Hannah's disappearance. His name was Thomas, a fisherman who had worked the area for decades. He had been out on the water that day when he saw the solitary kayak, and at first he thought nothing of it. But when the kayak remained unmoved for hours, he became concerned. However, the weather had been erratic that day, and by the time he returned to shore to report what he had seen, the kayak was gone. Claire met with Thomas at his small cabin, tucked away near the water's edge. He was a wiry man, his face weathered by years spent at sea, his hands rough from decades of hard work. When Claire asked about the kayak, his eyes darkened. "I've seen things out there," he said, his voice low and grave. "Things you won't believe. It's the water, the ocean. It pulls at people, you know? People don't realize it. It doesn't just take your body, it takes your soul. People think the currents are just strong, or the tides are bad, but no. There's something else out there." Claire leaned forward, sensing that Thomas was about to say something important, something that had been buried deep in his memory. He shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his hands tightening around his coffee cup. "I've seen kayaks drift out there before," he continued, his eyes distant. "But this one, it didn't make sense. It wasn't just caught in the current. It was like it was waiting. It wasn't moving, just sitting there. And then the fog rolled in, thick as a blanket, and when it lifted, the kayak was gone. I'm not saying I know what happened to her, but I've seen it. People go missing. It's not always an accident." Claire's pulse quickened as she listened. Thomas was describing something she had heard about in old local legends, the inexplicable disappearances, the whispers of people vanishing without a trace, the strange energy that seemed to seep into the coastline, drawing people into the water and then claiming them forever. "I've heard stories," Claire said carefully, "about the water around here. Stories of things being drawn into the depths. What do you think is really going on?" Thomas looked her squarely in the eye, his expression unreadable. "I don't think it's just the ocean. I think it's the land, too. People who come here, especially alone, they get too close to something that doesn't want to be found. There's a place near the cliffs, an old forgotten cove, where things have gone missing. They're never found again, just taken." The hairs on the back of Claire's neck stood on end as she absorbed Thomas's words. There was something dark about this place, something that no one had truly understood. The ocean had claimed people before, yes, but this was different. The ocean wasn't just a body of water. It was a force, one that had roots deep within the land itself. "Do you think the ocean took Hannah?" Claire asked, her voice barely a whisper. Thomas didn't answer right away. He seemed to consider the question carefully, as if weighing his words. Finally, he nodded slowly. "It's not just the water," he said again. "It's the whole damn place. The cliffs, the caves, the water. It calls to you, and once you hear it, you can't stop. The ocean may take you physically, but the land, it takes your soul. I've seen it happen. People go out there, and they're never the same. They're never found again, and they never leave the water." Claire stood up, her mind racing with the implications of what Thomas had said. The more she dug into the story, the more it seemed like there was something far darker at work here than a simple kayaking accident. The water was only part of the story. The land, the cliffs, the caves, they all seemed to hold pieces of a much larger, hidden truth. That night, Claire sat in her small rented cabin, sifting through the records she had collected from local authorities, piecing together the timeline of events from Hannah's disappearance. The official records painted a picture of a tragic accident. Strong tides, an ill-prepared kayaker, a solitary victim lost to the ocean. But the more Claire examined the details, the more gaps she found. The weather, the currents, the lack of evidence, none of it added up. Something was missing. Someone had to know more. Her phone buzzed with a new email from Rebecca, Hannah's friend, and as Claire opened it, a chill ran down her spine. "I've been thinking about our last conversation, about Hannah's cryptic message, the one about staying ahead of it. I didn't think much of it at the time, but now I'm wondering. I found something. Hannah's last post before she left. It was on a forum about the Oregon coast, one that's known for discussing local legends and mysterious disappearances. She had posted a response just days before she left, saying that she was following a trail to something ancient." Claire's heart raced as she read the message again. Following a trail to something ancient. Hannah had been searching for something that wasn't just a kayaking trip. The cryptic message echoed in Claire's mind as she tried to make sense of it all. She spent the rest of the evening combing through the forum, reading the posts and replies with growing unease. Hannah had been active on the forum, participating in discussions about the strange phenomena around the Oregon coastline, missing persons, local legends, strange disappearances. And then there was the post she had made right before her trip, buried among the threads. "I'm following a trail to something ancient. It's calling to me. I'll be back soon." It was the same tone Hannah had used when speaking to Rebecca, the same tone that had worried her friend. But now, it felt even more ominous. What had Hannah found? What had she uncovered in her research, in the days leading up to her disappearance? And why had she felt the need to go alone, to venture out into the ocean, into the very heart of the coast's dangerous waters? The answer seemed to be hiding just beyond her reach, buried in the history of the land itself. The forest, the cliffs, the sea, they were all connected. And Hannah had been drawn to something ancient, something older than anything Claire had ever imagined. The more Claire uncovered, the more it became clear that this wasn't a simple case of an adventurer lost at sea. The ocean had taken her, but the land had claimed her. The truth was out there, hidden beneath the waves and within the craggy cliffs, and Claire was getting closer. But she had no idea how deep the mystery went, or how much longer she had before it pulled her under, just as it had done to Hannah. There was something ancient in the waters of Oregon, something older than the coast itself, and Claire was about to uncover it, whether she was ready or not. The night was heavy, and the fog clung to the coastline like a suffocating blanket. Claire sat at her desk, the glow of her laptop screen illuminating her tired face as she sifted through old newspaper clippings, online forums, and police reports. She had become obsessed with the idea that Hannah's disappearance was not an isolated incident. The more she delved into the history of the coast, the more it seemed like there was something larger at play, something that went beyond the ocean and its deadly currents. As she dug deeper into the reports of disappearances along the Oregon coast, Claire found a pattern that had been hidden for decades. Every few years, someone would vanish without a trace, often near Depot Bay, the very area where Hannah had gone missing. The authorities chalked it up to the dangers of the water and the unpredictable nature of the tides, but Claire knew that there was more to it than that. There were too many coincidences, too many strange occurrences that defied explanation. In one of the more obscure reports, Claire found a reference to an old sailor's tale. The story spoke of a cursed stretch of coast near Depot Bay, where those who ventured too close to the cliffs would disappear into the ocean, never to be seen again. The locals had dismissed it as folklore, but the more Claire read, the more she realized that the disappearances were tied to this very spot. It wasn't just the ocean that was claiming these victims, it was the land itself, drawing people in, consuming them. Claire's phone buzzed, breaking her concentration. It was a message from Rebecca, Hannah's friend. "I think I've found something," the message began. "It's old, but it might be what you're looking for. I came across a journal from one of the local fishermen. It's from the 1960s, and it talks about strange currents and tides near Depot Bay. But what's even more unsettling is the part where he mentions something dark, something that calls to the people who are near the cliffs. He calls it the Eye of the Coast. I'll send you the pages." Claire's stomach twisted with unease. The mention of the Eye of the Coast was unfamiliar, but it felt significant. Could this be connected to the strange events she had been uncovering? The fishermen had always known the dangers of the ocean, but this seemed different. The Eye of the Coast, it was as if the very landscape had a mind of its own, waiting to claim anyone who dared approach. The next morning, Claire visited Rebecca to collect the journal pages. The older woman handed her a worn, tattered notebook, its pages yellowed with age. The journal entry from the 1960s was brief but chilling. "The water here is not like the water elsewhere. It calls to you. It pulls you in, not with the promise of safety, but with the promise of something far darker. They say the cliffs hide something ancient, something older than the sea itself. I've seen it. I've felt it. It's watching. It watches you until you can't turn back." Claire stared at the words, her pulse quickening. The journal entry seemed to confirm what she had feared, that the strange disappearances, including Hannah's, were connected to something far beyond simple misfortune. The fishermen had written about feeling watched, about the land and water working in tandem, luring people closer. It was the same feeling Claire had experienced when she first entered the forest, the same sensation she couldn't shake, the sense that the land itself was alive, waiting for them. But what was this Eye of the Coast? And how was it tied to the ancient forces the fishermen had mentioned? Claire couldn't ignore the sense of dread that clung to her, but she pressed on, determined to uncover the truth. Over the next few days, Claire visited more local residents, speaking with old-timers who had lived through the decades of disappearances. Most of them were reluctant to speak at first, but as she pieced together the information, one thing became clear. Everyone knew about the Eye of the Coast, but no one dared to speak of it openly. It was a taboo, a subject avoided at all costs. One elderly woman, who had lived in the area for over 70 years, finally spoke of an old legend that had been passed down through her family. She described an ancient ritual, performed by the indigenous people who once inhabited the land, designed to appease the forces that inhabited the coast. The eye, she explained, was not a literal eye, but a place, a point of convergence between the land, the ocean, and something else, something older, something that could make the land bend and twist. Those who ventured too close were claimed, and their bodies were taken by the water, but their spirits were bound to the land, to the coast, to the eye. Claire felt a cold shiver run through her as the woman's words sank in. This wasn't just about disappearances anymore. It was about something far older, something tied to the very heart of the coast itself. And whatever it was still out there, still waiting for the next person to come too close. The next clue came when Claire received a call from a Coast Guard officer named Lieutenant Marcus Collins. He had been part of the initial search efforts for Hannah and had been following Claire's investigation closely. "I've been thinking about this case," he said, his voice tight with urgency. "Something doesn't add up. I've been going over the GPS data again, the coordinates, and I found something strange. The last signal from Hannah's GPS wasn't just near the cliffs. It was almost exactly where the fisherman's journal mentioned the eye. I don't know what that means, but it's not a coincidence." Claire's heart raced. The eye of the coast. The location where the GPS had gone silent. The exact spot where the fisherman had warned of the ancient pull, the dark force that had claimed so many before. It all pointed to one thing. The truth was in the land, in the ocean, in the very heart of the coast itself. Claire felt a creeping dread settle over her as the pieces of the puzzle clicked together. She had thought the ocean was just a backdrop to the tragedy, the force that had taken Hannah. But now, she understood that it wasn't just the ocean. It was the land. It was the very fabric of this place that had been pulling people in, drawing them to the cliffs and the tides, waiting for them to uncover its ancient secret. It was time to go back. Claire gathered her things and made her way to the coast again, the weight of what she had learned heavy on her shoulders. As she walked toward the cliffs, she couldn't help but feel the presence of something watching her, following her every step. She knew the forest, the land, the water, they were all connected, and they were waiting for her to discover the final truth. What had happened to Hannah? What had happened to the others who had disappeared over the years? The answers were hidden in the land, buried in the water, in the eye of the coast. But as Claire walked closer to the cliffs, she couldn't shake the feeling that whatever she uncovered next might be the last thing she ever learned. The truth was waiting, just beyond the horizon, and the eye was watching. The coast had never seemed so desolate. Claire stood at the edge of the cliffs, staring out at the relentless waves crashing against the rocks below. The wind had picked up, swirling around her, carrying with it the unmistakable scent of salt and brine. She pulled her jacket tighter around her, but it did little to shield her from the chill that had settled deep into her bones. The ominous weight of what she had uncovered was beginning to feel all too real. The Eye of the Coast wasn't just a legend, it was a force, an ancient presence that had claimed those who dared to approach. And now, Claire knew she had been marked too. The ground beneath her feet seemed to vibrate slightly, as if the very earth was alive, resonating with the pull of the ocean. The waves continued their relentless assault on the rocks below, their deep, thunderous roar filling the air. Claire closed her eyes for a moment, letting the sound wash over her. It wasn't the crashing of waves that unsettled her, it was the feeling that the ocean was speaking to her, that it was trying to tell her something. She had learned so much in the past few days. The strange disappearances, the cryptic warnings, the stories passed down through generations, each one pointing to the same conclusion. The land, the ocean, the forest, they were all connected by something ancient, something that had been here long before any of the modern towns or settlements had been built. And it wasn't just the water that was dangerous, it was the land itself, it was the place, the eye. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, snapping her out of her thoughts. It was a message from Rebecca. "I think I know what Hannah was talking about," the message read. The eye. It's not just a place, it's a state of mind. The old legends say it's a force that draws people in, changes them. Once you find it, Once you see it, you can't walk away. It's always with you, always watching. But it doesn't just pull people in, it consumes them. Claire stared at the message, her heart sinking. Could it be true? Could the eye, the force that had claimed so many before her, really be what had taken Hannah? And if it had, what chance did she have of escaping its grasp now? She glanced out over the ocean again, her thoughts racing. The fog had started to roll in from the sea, thickening the air, making the landscape feel even more isolated, more distant. The cliffs, the forest beyond, everything felt disconnected, as if the world itself had become untethered, and Claire was drifting on the edge of something much darker. Turning back toward the small path that led away from the cliffs, Claire walked slowly, her mind still reeling from the weight of Rebecca's words. The truth was becoming clearer, but with that clarity came a new kind of fear. The more Claire uncovered, the more she realized that the eye wasn't just a place. It was a force that operated beyond human understanding, a presence that could bend time and space itself, drawing people in and altering their very perception of reality. The more she thought about it, the more Claire began to wonder if this was the very reason Hannah had gone missing. What if she hadn't been lost to an accident at sea? What if she had been drawn to the eye, just as the legends warned? What if the force had already claimed her, leaving behind only her GPS as a clue, as a message to those who might follow? Claire's thoughts were interrupted by the sudden sound of footsteps behind her. She turned quickly, but there was no one there. The path was empty, save for the dark silhouette of the trees lining the horizon. The sound had been faint, almost imperceptible, but it was real. Someone, or something, was out there, and it wasn't just the wind. She continued down the path, quickening her pace. As she walked, the forest grew denser, the trees taller, their branches twisting and turning, blocking out what little sunlight remained. The fog seemed to thicken around her, curling up from the ground like a living thing, wrapping itself around her legs. Claire's breath caught in her throat as she reached the place where the coastline met the forest. It was here, in this very spot, that she felt the full force of the forest's oppressive presence. The air was thick, heavy with an energy that hummed beneath her skin. She had read about places like this, areas where the land seemed to resist understanding, to refuse any attempt to uncover its secrets. But now, standing at the edge of the forest, Claire felt it firsthand. This wasn't just a remote corner of the Oregon coast. It was a place where something ancient and unknowable was buried deep beneath the surface. Her phone buzzed again, this time with a new message from Rebecca. The eye is a place where time doesn't work the way it should. It's a place where the past, present, and future collide. It's where things disappear, not just people, but things, memories, moments, whole pieces of time. You don't walk away from the eye, Claire. Not really. You're marked by it. Always. Claire stopped in her tracks, staring at the message, the eye. The thought of it had consumed her thoughts for days now, but the idea that it was not just a place, but something that could manipulate time, that could warp reality itself, it was too much to process. But the more she thought about it, the more it made sense. The disappearances, the strange occurrences, the feeling of being drawn to the water, it all pointed to one thing. The eye had claimed Hannah, just as it had claimed others before her, and now it was drawing Claire in, pulling her deeper, closer. "Claire," a voice called out, breaking her thoughts. She spun around, but no one was there. The forest was silent, the fog swirling around her feet, the world closing in. "You've come too far." It wasn't just the wind. The voice was unmistakable. It was the forest, the land, the eye itself. The realization struck her like a bolt of lightning. This wasn't just about Hannah. It wasn't just about the disappearances. It was about something far older, something far darker, that had been waiting for her, and for anyone else who dared to seek it. The forest was alive, the land was alive, and it had marked her. The sound of footsteps echoed again, but this time Claire didn't turn around. She didn't need to. She could feel the presence behind her, closing in, the force of it heavy in the air, pressing down on her chest, suffocating her. She had thought that the answers were out there, that the truth was hidden in the forest, in the ocean, in the dark, forgotten places of the world. But now she understood. The truth wasn't just out there, it was here, inside the land, inside the eye, and it wasn't going to let her leave. Not now, not ever. Claire's footsteps faltered as she moved forward, the path ahead narrowing, the forest seeming to close in around her. The fog thickened, the air grew heavier, and the world around her seemed to distort, like she was slipping between realities. As she took one last step into the darkness, Claire knew the truth. The eye wasn't just a place, it was a force, and it had claimed her. The forest had never let go. It had only been waiting, and now it was hers. The truth was buried in the land, beneath the water, in the very fabric of the coast itself. And Claire had become a part of it. Forever. The air in the forest had become thick and suffocating, as though the very atmosphere was alive, pressing in on Claire with each labored breath she took. Her mind was reeling, her thoughts fragmented, but one truth stood at the forefront of her consciousness. The eye was no myth. It was real, and it was here, in the land, in the water, in the fog that curled at her feet. Her footsteps were slow and deliberate now, the dense forest around her almost closing in, the trees becoming taller and more twisted as if they were reaching for her. She could feel the pull, the same magnetic force she had read about in old reports, in fishermen's tales, in the whispered warnings of the locals. It was all real. The forest was not just a collection of trees and earth, it was a living, breathing entity that could bend time, space, and perception itself. And now, it had claimed her, as it had claimed Hannah, as it had claimed others before. The deeper she moved into the woods, the more her surroundings seemed to warp, the trees growing denser and more oppressive, their branches twisted into grotesque shapes. The mist thickened, swirling around her legs, and she could no longer see the path ahead. The forest was shifting, as though it was remaking itself, bending to some unseen force. The voice had spoken to her earlier, and now she couldn't shake the feeling that it was watching her, waiting for her to reach the center of it all. She could feel its presence, like something ancient, something powerful, pushing her toward an inevitable conclusion. But what was it? What did the forest want from her? What was it that had drawn her in, pulled her this far? Ahead, through the thick mist, Claire saw a faint glow. It was soft at first, like the faintest hint of moonlight breaking through clouds, but it grew brighter the closer she moved toward it. It was the same glow she had seen at the altar in the cave, the same strange light that had filled the cave just before everything went dark. It wasn't natural, it wasn't the sun, or the moon, or any earthly source of light. It was something else. Her heart pounded in her chest as she walked toward it, her breath shallow, her senses heightened. The pull grew stronger with each step. She knew, deep down, that she was reaching the heart of it all, the center of the eye, the source of its power. The light flickered, then suddenly flared brighter, casting long shadows that stretched out before her like fingers reaching toward her. The trees around her creaked, their branches groaning as if they were alive, responding to the light, to the energy that was emanating from it. She couldn't explain it, but she felt it. Something had shifted, and it wasn't just the forest. It was her too. She was part of it now. As Claire moved closer, the mist seemed to thicken even more, swirling around her legs, her body becoming heavier with each step. Her head felt light, as though she were floating. but the ground beneath her feet was solid. The strange light bathed her in an eerie, unnatural glow, and as she reached the center, she finally understood. This wasn't just about the forest or the ocean. This was something ancient, something that had been here long before humanity had ever set foot on these lands. Claire stepped into the clearing, and what she saw stopped her dead in her tracks. In the center, beneath the strange light, stood a structure, a stone circle, unlike anything she had ever seen. The stones were massive, worn by time, their surfaces covered with moss and lichens. They stood arranged in a perfect circle, as though they had been placed with meticulous care. The glow was coming from the center of the circle, where a stone altar stood. It was carved with symbols that were eerily familiar, the same ones she had seen at the cave, the same markings that had been etched into the rocks. Claire approached cautiously, her body trembling as she stepped closer to the altar. She could feel the energy radiating from it, a pulse that seemed to resonate deep within her chest. Her breath quickened as she reached out, her fingers brushing against the cold stone. It was as if the altar was alive, its surface humming with a strange power, a force that seemed to draw her in, pulling her closer. The air was heavy with an oppressive weight, and Claire knew that this was it, the heart of the eye. This was what had claimed the others before her. This was what had claimed Hannah, and now it was claiming her. A voice whispered in her mind, a low murmur that seemed to come from the very air around her. "You have found it. You have seen it. You cannot leave." The words sent a chill down her spine. Claire's heart pounded in her chest, and for a moment she felt a deep sense of helplessness. The forest had been waiting for her, watching her every step. She had been drawn to this place, to this altar, and now she was trapped. There was no escape from the eye. But then, as her hand rested on the stone, something shifted, something inside her. The pull, the sensation of being consumed, of being taken by the force that had controlled so many before her, seemed to wane just for a moment. It was as if she were on the edge of understanding something crucial. The force that had claimed her, that had claimed so many, was not invincible. There was a way to break free. Her thoughts raced as she tried to push away the feeling of being consumed by the eye. There had to be something. There had to be a way to stop it. But the more she thought, the more it became clear. The forest was a part of her now. She couldn't outrun it. She couldn't escape it. It had already marked her. The voice came again, stronger now. "You cannot leave. You are part of it." The fog began to swirl around her, growing thicker, and the forest seemed to close in around her. The trees creaked, their branches groaning as if in warning. The air grew colder, heavier, as the pulse from the altar grew stronger, reverberating through the ground beneath her feet. Claire's heart raced, but she knew, deep in her gut, that there was no escape. But as the darkness began to take hold of her, something inside her snapped. She refused to let the forest claim her, to let it drag her into the darkness like it had done with Hannah and so many others before her. She took a deep breath, pushed the fear aside, and stepped forward. "Not today," she whispered, her voice steady despite the fear that gripped her. With everything inside her, she slammed her palm against the stone altar, feeling the pulse of the eye surge through her, and for the first time, she felt it falter. The light flickered. The hum of the forest dimmed. For a brief moment, she had a chance. She had broken the cycle, but how long would it last? How much longer would she be able to escape the grip of the eye? Her heart raced as she turned and sprinted back toward the forest's edge, the fog swirling behind her, the trees groaning as if protesting her escape. She ran, her breath coming in ragged gasps, her footsteps pounding against the soft earth. But as she neared the edge of the forest, the whispers began again. They were faint, distant at first, but they were getting louder. "You cannot escape, not ever." And though Claire had made it out of the eye, she knew one thing: the forest wasn't done with her. Not yet. It was waiting, and sooner or later, it would come for her again. Claire didn't stop running. The path ahead seemed to stretch endlessly before her, as though the forest was trying to push her deeper, drawing her back into its grasp. Her lungs burned, and her legs ached, but she kept moving, her mind consumed by one singular thought: escape. The eye, the forest, the land itself, they had claimed so many before her, and now she had somehow broken free. But for how long? Her footsteps pounded against the earth, each step a reminder that she was running out of time. The whispers had grown louder, like a chorus in the back of her mind calling to her, urging her to turn around. You cannot escape. Not ever. The voice was everywhere now, seeping into her thoughts, tainting her every breath. She wasn't just running from the forest, she was running from something far older, far darker, something that had been waiting for her, watching her every move since the moment she set foot on this land. As she reached the edge of the forest, Claire hesitated, her feet sliding to a stop on the wet earth. She could see the distant horizon, the outline of the town of Depot Bay just beyond the tree line, the familiarity of it a brief comfort. But behind her, the forest stood still, a dark mass of trees, its presence unmistakable. It wasn't gone. It was still there, watching, waiting. She turned slowly, her breath coming in short gasps. The fog had begun to lift, but the feeling of being watched, of being pursued, remained. It wasn't just the forest anymore. It was something in the air, something that reached beyond the trees and the earth. The eye was still there, its influence spreading out across the coastline, pulling at her from all directions. Her thoughts were interrupted by a voice that echoed from the trees, so clear and sharp that it sent a cold shiver down her spine. You cannot run forever. Claire spun around, but there was no one there. The trees were still, the mist had begun to fade, and the world felt eerily quiet. But she knew it wasn't over. She could feel it deep in her bones. The eye hadn't just marked her, it had taken root inside her, and the forest was its vessel. She took a deep breath, steeling herself. It was time to confront whatever this was, to face it head on. She couldn't keep running. The truth had been lurking in the shadows, in the very fabric of the land, and now it was time for her to understand it fully. Claire walked back into the forest, each step more deliberate than the last. The trees closed in around her once again, but this time she felt no fear. She had already faced the eye once. She had already felt its power, but this time she would not be taken by it. This time she would face it. As she made her way back toward the stone altar, she could feel the pulse of the land beneath her feet. The fog seemed to thicken again, swirling around her like a living thing, but Claire pressed forward. She had to go back to where it all began, the altar, the center of it all. When she reached the clearing, the altar was just as she had left it, bathed in the faint, flickering light. But something had changed. The air felt different, heavier, more oppressive. The symbols on the stone seemed to glow now, their lines sharper, more defined, as if they had been waiting for her to return, waiting for her to complete the cycle. The whispering voice returned, low and insistent, seeping through the fog, curling around her thoughts. You have come back. But it's too late. The eye knows you. It owns you. Claire's heart raced, but she didn't falter. She had already broken the cycle once. She could do it again. She stepped forward, placing her hand on the cold stone, feeling the pulse beneath her fingertips. The energy was stronger now, a deep, thrumming vibration that seemed to resonate through her entire body. The land was alive. It was waiting for her to make a choice, to either succumb to it or to challenge it once and for all. The voice grew louder, almost deafening now. You cannot escape, Claire. The forest will never let you go. The eye will always claim you. Claire took a deep breath, closing her eyes. She couldn't let the forest win. She couldn't let it consume her, just as it had consumed so many others. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the key, the rusted ancient key that had once been attached to the GPS device, the one that had led her to this moment. It had always felt significant, but now, standing at the altar, she understood its true purpose. With trembling hands, she placed the key into a small slot at the center of the altar. It fit perfectly, as though it had always belonged there, as though it had been waiting for her to unlock the final piece. The ground beneath her feet trembled, the altar pulsed with energy, and the symbols on the stone flared brightly, casting an unnatural light that filled the clearing. Claire stumbled back, shielding her eyes from the blinding glow, but she didn't move. She had come this far, and she wouldn't back down now. The fog swirled violently around her, and for a brief moment, the forest seemed to shift, the trees bending and groaning as if responding to the energy that had been released. The entire forest seemed to come alive, its branches stretching toward her, its roots twisting beneath her feet. The ground itself felt like it was shifting, turning, as though the very land was in the process of transforming. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, everything stopped. The glow from the altar dimmed, the trembling ground stilled, and the fog began to dissipate. The trees around her stood still, as though frozen in time, and for a moment, Claire thought she had imagined it all. But then, she heard it, the faintest sound, like a distant whisper. It wasn't coming from the trees or the earth. It was coming from inside her mind. "You are free. For now." Claire's breath caught in her throat. She had done it. She had broken the cycle. The eye was no longer pulling at her, no longer drawing her in. The forest had released its grip, and for the first time, she felt a sense of peace, a sense of finality. The land had let go. But as Claire stood there looking out over the clearing, she realized one undeniable truth. The forest was not truly gone. It had not been destroyed. It had simply moved on, waiting for the next person to come too close. It would always be there, in the shadows, in the fog, in the water. It would always be waiting. And as Claire turned and made her way back toward the edge of the forest, she knew she could never truly escape. The eye would never let her go, not completely. It had already claimed her, and she would never forget what she had seen. The forest would always be with her. Claire's legs were heavy as she walked away from the altar, each step pulling her further from the heart of the forest, but leaving something behind, something she could never fully escape. Her breath came in shallow bursts, the cold air biting at her lungs, but the weight on her chest seemed to lift with each passing moment. The forest had released her, yes, but as she glanced back, she could feel it still watching, waiting. There was no escaping what she had uncovered. She wasn't sure how long she had been walking when she finally emerged from the thick cover of trees and reached the edge of the forest, where the mist had thinned. The small town of Depot Bay was ahead, the familiar houses and streets coming into view. She paused, just for a moment, as though the landscape had changed. The town now feeling like a distant memory rather than the place she had called home for the past few days. Had it only been a few days? The passage of time felt distorted, warped, as if the forest had twisted it, altering her perception. As Claire walked into the town, her thoughts raced. The strange, distorted reality of the forest had been replaced by the normalcy of the streets, but the shadows of what she had learned, what she had experienced, still lingered, deep within her. She had come so close to unraveling the truth, but now that she had faced the eye, now that she had confronted the forest itself, she couldn't help but feel that the answers she sought had only led to more questions. Was it really over? Had she truly escaped the forest's grip? Or was she simply a part of its long, unfolding story? The forest had marked her. The eye had watched her. And though it had let her go, there was no denying the truth. It had claimed a piece of her, something that would always remain tied to the land, to the ocean, to the mysterious force that had drawn her in. She sat down on a bench, her hands trembling as she took out her phone. She had ignored all calls and messages over the past few days, but now, as she looked down at the screen, she saw a missed call from Rebecca. Claire dialed her back, the weight of the silence between them hanging heavy. The phone rang once, twice, before Rebecca picked up. "Claire?" Her voice was shaky, filled with concern. "I've been trying to reach you. What happened? Where are you?" I'm okay," Claire said, though the words felt hollow. "I've been in the forest. I found something." Rebecca's voice grew softer, as though she already knew. "You found it, didn't you?" The eye. Claire closed her eyes, her hand tightening around the phone. "I did, but it's not just the eye, Rebecca. It's everything. The land, the water. It's all connected, pulled together by something ancient, something that's been here longer than any of us. And I don't know how to explain it, but it marked me. It claimed me, just like it claimed Hannah, and so many others before." Rebecca was silent for a long moment, and when she spoke again, her voice was quiet, hesitant. "What do you mean, marked you? What happened in there, Claire? You don't sound like yourself. You sound different." Claire swallowed hard. The weight of her words felt impossible to carry, but she needed to say them, needed to make sense of it all, even if the truth didn't make any sense at all. "I think it's still with me," Claire said softly. "The forest, the eye, it's not gone. It's never gone. And even though I left, even though I walked away, I can't shake the feeling that it's still watching, still waiting. It doesn't just take your body, Rebecca. It takes your soul, your essence, and once it has you, it doesn't let go." Rebecca's voice cracked, her worry palpable. "Claire, this isn't you. You need help. You need to come home. Talk to someone. Whatever happened, whatever you saw in that forest, you don't have to carry it alone." But Claire knew she wasn't going to find the answers in the town, or in the comfort of familiar faces. There was no one who could understand what she had seen, no one who could explain the pull of the forest, the suffocating presence that had followed her all the way back here. The truth she had uncovered was far too dark, too ancient for anyone to comprehend. "I can't," Claire whispered. "I can't explain it, but I can't come back. Not like this. The forest has changed me, Rebecca. It's a part of me now, and it always will be." With that, Claire ended the call, feeling the weight of her decision settle in her chest. She had to leave. There was no room for her in this town anymore. No room for the life she had left behind. She had seen the truth, and the truth had changed everything. There was no going back to the life she knew. But as Claire stood up from the bench, a strange calm washed over her. The forest had taken its toll, but it had also given her something powerful. She was connected to it now, and that connection would follow her wherever she went. The wind picked up, rustling the trees in the distance, and Claire felt the familiar pull again. It wasn't over. It would never be over. She turned her back on the town and began to walk toward the cliffs again, drawn back to the place where it all began. The forest was still out there, waiting for her, and she knew that there was no escape. She had been marked by the eye, and now she had become a part of its eternal story. The truth was buried deep in the land, in the water, in the fog, and Claire had only scratched the surface. And as the fog began to rise around her once again, she realized that she would never truly escape. The eye had claimed her, and it always would. Claire's footsteps echoed softly as she walked toward the cliffs once more, the familiar sound of the waves crashing below now almost comforting. The fog had rolled in thickly around her, the mist curling and shifting like a living thing. Every step she took felt heavy, weighted with the knowledge that she was no longer just a visitor here. She had become a part of the land, a part of the story that had been unfolding for centuries. The forest, the eye, the ocean, all of it had claimed her, and there was no turning back now. She reached the edge of the cliffs, where the rocky outcrop met the roiling sea below. The wind howled through the trees, the fog swirling around her as though trying to pull her into the depths of the forest once more. But Claire stood firm, staring out at the water, her heart heavy but resolute. It had been so long since she'd felt like this, so long since she'd truly understood the pull of the forest, the way it had drawn her in. The things she had learned, the secrets that had been buried beneath the earth, were part of her now. It wasn't just the eye, it wasn't just the ocean, it was the entire coastline, the land itself, that had left its mark on her soul. She thought back to her conversation with Rebecca, the worry in her voice, the pleading for Claire to come home, to seek help. But there was no help for her. No one could understand what she had experienced. The truth was beyond anyone's comprehension, and the more Claire thought about it, the more she realized that the only person who could truly understand was the one who had witnessed it all, the one who had been consumed by it. Hannah. The thought of her made Claire's chest tighten. What had happened to Hannah? Had she been drawn to the same truths, the same forces that Claire had discovered? Was the forest truly a place that consumed those who got too close, or was it something more? Claire couldn't shake the feeling that Hannah's disappearance had been part of something much larger, something that had been waiting for both of them, waiting for them to find it, to uncover its secrets. The fog thickened around her, and Claire's thoughts turned to the place where she had found the altar, where the symbols had glowed with an unnatural light. That was where the eye had revealed itself to her, where the force had shown her its true power. She had thought that confronting it, facing it head-on, would be the end. But she had only uncovered the beginning. The truth had been waiting for her, and now she knew she could never walk away. She turned away from the cliffs and walked toward the narrow path that led back into the forest. Every step felt like it took her further from the life she had known, further into the dark unknown. The trees seemed to whisper, their branches swaying in the wind, and Claire knew that it wasn't just the forest she was walking into. It was the very heart of the eye. The path was familiar now, as if it had always been there, waiting for her. She followed it deeper into the woods, the fog swirling around her like a shroud. The trees closed in, their twisted branches forming a canopy above her, and she could feel the presence of something ancient, something that had been here long before any of them. The eye wasn't just a place, it was a force, one that had existed for millennia, claiming those who came too close, changing them, marking them for its own. The whispers began again, faint at first, like a distant murmur, but growing louder with each step Claire took. They filled her ears, her mind, until she couldn't tell where they were coming from, or if they were just inside her own thoughts. You are part of it now. You will never escape. The voice was soft, almost gentle, as though it were coaxing her forward, drawing her in deeper. She reached the clearing once again, the stone altar standing at the center, bathed in the same eerie glow. The symbols etched into the stone pulsed, the light flickering in time with the rhythm of the forest. Claire walked toward it, her hand trembling as she reached out to touch the stone. It was cold to the touch, but there was an unmistakable energy emanating from it, something that vibrated deep within her chest. The forest had claimed her, the eye had marked her, and now she had become part of it, part of the force that had waited for so long, drawing in those who sought to uncover its secrets. She closed her eyes, letting the feeling of the forest wash over her. She could hear the whispering voices, the hum of the altar, the sound of the trees swaying in the wind. It was as if the entire world was alive, waiting for her to step into it completely, to give herself over to it entirely. Claire didn't resist. She couldn't. The pull was too strong, too overwhelming. She had come this far, uncovered so much, and now there was no turning back. The forest had given her the truth, but it had also taken something from her. It had consumed her, just as it had consumed so many before. The truth was simple, yet terrifying. The forest, the eye, the land, they were all part of an ancient force, one that had been waiting for centuries for someone to uncover it, to awaken it from its slumber. And now, Claire was part of that story. She would always be part of it, marked by the eye, tied to the land. She opened her eyes and stepped forward, her footsteps echoing in the stillness of the clearing. The forest had claimed her, but she was no longer afraid. There was no escape. She had become part of something larger than herself, something that had existed long before her and would continue to exist long after she was gone. As Claire stood before the altar, the whispers in her mind grew louder, filling her senses until there was nothing else. The forest had claimed her, but she had found her place within it. And as the trees swayed, the cymbals pulsed, and the land itself seemed to hum with energy, Claire knew one undeniable truth. She was part of the forest now, and she always would be.